Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor, the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Red Circle, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Also, check out Off the Floor. Subscribe at winnow.app. That's two N's, two P's, winnow.app/off the floor. Free for the first week, $3.05 per month. And check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. We were in Boca today. Thankfully, there were no leaks at FAU. But reach out to our friends from Boca, Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. That's WCUFL.com. They can handle all of your water damage, your mold damage, but also they do the preventative stuff. And you need that because, insurance companies don't take care of you after the fact. Go to WCUFL.com. Reach out to Michael, Robert, and his team, fully state certified. They do a great job, and they service more than just Boca. They service Broward and Dade counties all over the state as well. Again, Water Cleanup of Florida. If you've got the schmutz,
they got the guts.
And now, today's episode.
Down the Biscayne.
Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Buck said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor on the opening of Heat training camp. Alex Toledo, myself, and Brady Hawk were all there today. Greg Sylvander is going to be joining Alex and I here. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports, Alex at Tropical Blanket, Greg Sylvander at Greg Sylvander. Also, second half of this episode, make sure you stick around because Brady and I had a chance to pull Jaime Jaquez Jr. aside today for a few minutes, find out which nickname he likes the best and kind of how he's preparing for his rookie season. But we're going to focus on what happened today at training camp. And really, there was one story, and the story was Kyle Lowry. And we got into this in the last 10 minutes of the last podcast. Actually, make sure you check out the one in between. It wasn't the last podcast because we did a great interview with Josh Richardson and another with Nikola Jovic, and we stitched those two together. So you can listen to both of them on our last episode, and we think you'll enjoy that because one guy who's going to have a major role this season in Josh, and one I think that he would like to have a role in Nikola Jovic. But the story was Kyle Lowry. We spoke about this on a previous episode. He did not speak at media day. He was there. He was one of 21 players that was there, but he was the only one not to speak to the media. So the question was, would he speak at training camp? Not only did he speak, he spoke first, okay? Now, typically, if you've covered the Heat at all on the road or familiar with what they do, if you go to a road shoot-around and it opens after they finish practice, it opens to the media, Kyle's always gone. Kyle and Jimmy are typically gone. That never used to happen during the Big Three era. Literally, you could walk in there and still get LeBron, Bosh, Dwayne, and everybody else, but Kyle dips, okay? So today, maybe he was in a hurry as well, or maybe he just wanted to get something off his chest and get it over with. He did say at one point in the interview, one of the great things about retirement was not having to talk to you guys anymore. And then he laughed after that. But he started out from the very beginning. He was surrounded by about 20 to 25 media members, and Ira, as he typically does, got in there and asked the tough question first, which was how he sees his role. And Kyle was definitive. He said, I expect to be the starting point guard. And several opportunities to back down on that, did not, was asked about the possibility of coming off the bench, since he has done that before. He did that effectively at times last year. I know that's the role that the Heat would prefer for him if he's here. We've talked about that on the podcast. And he repeated, I don't expect to be coming off the bench. I expect to be the starting point guard. My initial thoughts on this, and then I'll go to the two of you guys, because I know Alex was kind of in the background on that, but you've heard it since. Greg's heard it since. It's circulated. This reminded me quite a bit of a previous training camp that Alex and I actually attended, which that one was in West Palm at Kaiser University, and that was Jimmy's introduction to the Heat. But Dion Waiters was still a big part of the team then. And I remember talking to Dion, and Dion, saying that he wanted more touches, more reps, be a focal point of the offense. And then we went to Spoelstra after it, and Spo was not on board. And we know how that season went. It wasn't just because of gummies on a plane. There was a lot of stuff that went on there that kind of phased Dion out. And Deion was still under contract for multiple years after that, and they were able to move the contract at the trade deadline. Kyle Lowry's in the last year of his contract, a 3-year contract that's worth a lot more than Deion's contract was annually. Been rumors about the possible trade of him, but this again rung a bell because then Eric Spoelstra was asked about it afterwards, and Eric said that there had been no decision made about that to this point. He was going to let things play out in training camp. This came a day after Heat players, when asked about the point guard situation, didn't mention a definitive starter there. And also, when we talked about leadership, they didn't really mention Kyle. They mentioned Kevin, Bam, and others. I'll go to you first on this, Greg, because I know you have sort of strong thoughts on it. Where does this go now? Because I mean, we've had intel that if Kyle was told he was going to come off the bench, it was not going to go well. We've shared that, and then today we saw it in real life, and it doesn't seem to me like this is one of those things where a player comes out and says, "I expect to compete for the starting job. I expect to earn back my starting job. I committed myself this summer," and he did talk about being in good shape. He looks in good shape, actually. But I committed myself to being in the best possible shape to help this team win as the starting point guard. That's what I'm shooting for. No, he said, "I expect to be the starting point guard." That is more of, I expect it to be given to me because I'm the only point guard on the roster, right? It's kind of how it felt.
That's, you hit the nail in the head right there. Like, I think he's digging his heels in because rightfully so. He looks around at the roster and there's no tenured point guard to compete against him. So he's basically talking about a lot of younger players that are still trying to figure out whether they're even rotation level players in the NBA and carving out careers for themselves. And he looks around and says, obviously, at my salary, at my stature, I am the starting point guard. There is no debate about that. But the weird just part about it is that I think we've all assumed that Josh and Tyler would be a more effective starting unit. And so that's just the weird part of it that I don't know how to necessarily, I don't know that it's going to impact this team from a locker room perspective yet. I just ultimately know that this, to me, feels like an organization and a player that kind of in the back of their head thought that somehow, some way, they probably weren't going to have to continue to spend time together, and that didn't come to fruition. So they're now spending time together, and that just inherently is going to be a little weird and a little rocky. And it doesn't mean they won't figure it out. They're all professionals. I hope that they move Kyle by virtue of the fact that I think that they could use more functional pieces at his salary range, and he clearly doesn't appear to be I won't say that he's swimmingly happy about being in Miami, not the city, but the place that he's in with the organization, where he's having to kind of bark out that he's the starter. And that shouldn't have even been a question when he was signed here. Like, he was supposed to be the missing piece. And so it all just leads me to believe. And then I got blocked by him today on Twitter. So now it's Hassan Whiteside and Kyle Lowry both have done it with blocks against Greg Sylvander. So we'll see how that one plays out. I just think that people are kind of over this thing. And it's unfortunate that it's going to end that way. I hope that they find a deal, because they can find stuff that even doesn't hurt them in the future financially, just to kind of make this less of a cloud overhead, because this is really quiet right now. This gets louder if all of a sudden you have bad point guard play and then you have him on your bench and you're not starting the regular season so hot. That's the kind of stuff I think they just need to monitor and watch for.
Well, here's a couple things about this, and then I'll go to Alex. The first thing is that we talked about 3 players who were constantly in trade conversations and how they would handle it: Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, and Tyler Hero. And the latter 2 have handled it in exemplary fashion. So let's just start there. Like, Tyler has handled it by poking fun at it, being defiant about it, but not taking on the heat in any way, right? Like, he's taking on the world, okay, with the heat on his jersey. And so, whatever you were worried about, his frustration with it, which existed, by the way, behind the scenes, he has handled this incredibly maturely for a 23-year-old. All right. Duncan Robinson has been in trade talks constantly. And Heat fans will say, well, he got paid, so he's got no reason to complain, and he hasn't lived up to the contract. But the same is true of Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry makes more money than Duncan Robinson by a significant amount. And honestly, they have kind of the same role this year. Like they're envisioning the same role for the two of them. One is the designated playmaker, and the other is the designated shooter coming off the bench. That, again, spots will be fought for in camp. And we did not say that we have a definitive starting lineup. I was told that likely Spo's lean would be Hero, Richardson, Butler, Love, and Adebayo, with Lowry, Robinson, and Martin not in that order, coming off the bench. Backup big, Bryant, Orlando Robinson, 10th man spot, Highsmith, although we all think he's going to play more, Jaquez, and Jovic. Like that is basically the group, okay? But it could change between now and the end of camp. Spo's going to tinker with something. He started Yurt in one of the first preseason games last year. He started Mo Harkless in 2021, right? So like in the first preseason game. So these things are subject to change. But with that being said, again, two guys seem to be handling it really well. And one was doing this. I'm trying to set the scene here for people who don't understand what training camp is like. Everybody on the Heat is there. Okay. It's not as much media. Today was more than it's going to be the next few days. But everybody, when they're trying to get away from some of the media, right? They're trying to get away from their families and bond, right? That's the whole thing. Stay at a hotel. They do the 2-a-days. They're available to us after the first session. Pat's there. He was talking to the FAU coach today. Spo came over afterwards as well. Okay. Pat's there. I didn't even see Andy, but Adam was there. Nick was there, right? Zoe was there. They're all there. I took a picture of this. They're all there. They're at the long tables there on the floor, and they're all like chatting it up. Other players are coming off the floor while Kyle is like stating his, to a certain degree, independence on another part of the floor. And I'm sure that the report came back pretty quickly about what he said, and I don't think they were surprised by any of it. But it just seems to me, again, like the dichotomy of kind of a team pulling in one direction and one guy pulling in another. And it's similar to last year when he spoke at Media Day and essentially acted like he didn't care what Riley said about his conditioning. And I think that's it. I've never heard he dislikes Miami as a city, as a place, or anything like that. But it's just the whole Heat culture thing from him. He's fought it from the beginning. And today it just jumped out to you. And you kind of expect it from Dion Waiters, right? But this is a guy who has a chance to go to the Hall of Fame. And this isn't how it's supposed to play out. Alex, go to you on this. Is there any scenario where him starting at point guard this year for them makes sense?
Well, the only scenario is if he comes out in training camp and really earns that spot, because we've seen that Spo is, amenable to, making changes like that and maybe going with the unexpected route, even though it's clearly not trending that way whatsoever. I don't expect that to be the case. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they found something with him running bench units. He's aging. It's a much better way to conserve him and just have him healthier for, playoff contributions that matter. He's had these moments, but you want him to be, I think, more consistent than that. And the way to do it is by having him off the bench. And you look at the numbers and, they had like a plus 2.7 net rating, if I remember correctly, when he played with Jimmy, Bam, and Tyler last season. And then if you do it to Kyle without those guys, it was plus 4.3. So without all three of their best players, like those units were fantastic, with Kyle at the helm there. And that's not going to be what makes the decision. All I'm saying is, like, there's been a lot of evidence now that he that's probably the way to go, considering the age, all that. And then you get to this, and it was like, yeah, I understand the logic that Gabe was the guy who was starting in the last two playoffs, and now he's gone. So in Kyle's head, it's like, yeah, I'm the starting point guard. I'm the only point guard remaining here that isn't a G League or two-way guy. So I understand that logic, but definitely the tone was kind of combative. I think it was tough because it's so loud in there, and I wasn't in the front of the group, so I missed like half of what he said. But I 100% heard the part where he said, I expect to be the starting point guard. He said it with no hesitation whatsoever.
Said it 3 times, actually.
Yeah. He said his job is to expect to be the starting point guard. And then Ira immediately followed up and said, are you up to it physically? And because he's had these problems. And then he said immediately without hesitating. Again, yes. And he explained at one point that he thinks that he was kind of gassed out, that which led to these kind of injuries and these setbacks. So he thinks, probably I don't remember the exact quote, but he basically implied that playing less minutes, which is kind of what was already happening, right? It's somewhere in the early 20s as opposed to being a 30 plus minute type of guy is going to be what gets him healthy for the playoffs. And another point, he said he's willing to do what's best for the team to help the team win. But yeah, the tone was absolutely combative. Like, I think there's no doubt around it. And like you mentioned, he was cornered into these questions. He was literally cornered. Like, it's just cameras all around you. You just finished being in a competitive environment. You have your sweat flowing. It's just, I don't know. It was intense.
Alex, I don't
very
think
intense.
Alex, I don't think he was cornered. I think he wanted this out. I don't. I know when a guy doesn't want to answer a question. He knew that question was coming. And again, he did it first. He did it before Spo talked, which kind of put Spoelstra in the position. And I don't think this was intentional. Guy wants to leave. He obviously wanted to get out of there, right?
Yeah.
And he does a lot. That's what I'm saying. Usually when you come in to shoot-arounds on the road, he's already gone, okay? But he did it, and then Eric had to address it afterwards. And I'm sure, as Eric is kind of, his mind's all over the place after practices, and he's talking to different people, and he's got all these things in his head. But I'm sure he looks over and he sees Kyle is talking, and he knows that something like this might come out. He's going to get asked a question about it. The Heat PR staff has been with Eric since the very beginning, since 2008. It's the same people. They prepare him. So he knew when he was coming off that, obviously, other than, hey, I'm happy to be at FAU, because there were a lot of FAU reporters there, and we're great to be in Boca training, that he was going to get asked about Kyle. He knows that, because he knows that the beat guys are going to ask about it after Kyle just says that. And Spo stayed strong. Spo did not say that's our QB1 like he has said before. He said we go into camp and there's an opening. And there was a tweet out there today, okay? And I assume Popovich said this today, where he was talking about his roster with the Spurs. And he says, if Manu Ginobili can come off the bench, then anybody can come off the bench. And I just, when you look at this situation, Goran Dragic and Dwayne Wade both did more for the Miami Heat than Kyle Lowry has to this point, obviously, okay? And both of them were still playing at a higher level than Kyle has played of late. And both of them had the conversation with Spo and came off the bench. And if Kyle was willing to do it last year, the fact that Gabe is not on the roster shouldn't really change that equation. We can go back and say the Heat should have paid Gabe. That's another conversation. That might be a whole podcast here, because Gabe's not even starting with the Lakers. He would start here, okay? And that was a money decision, okay? There's no way around it. That was, they lowballed Gabe at the very beginning. He had a number. He was frustrated by it, and then so he ended up going elsewhere. And you can argue they shouldn't have paid Gabe what he ultimately got paid. And they will talk about how they offered him more over the course of the deal and all that sort of stuff. Gabe was thinking more on an average, but we can have that conversation, and we will. But the point is this: it's not. It seems to me that the way Lowry is viewing this is, there's nobody else here, so I should start. When the real point is what Alex is talking about, which is they're a better team with him doing what he was doing off the bench, and frame it in a positive. This is how you can still contribute. And that's the way that it was pitched to me this offseason by those in the organization. They're like, look, this is a way for Spo to manage his minutes. Like, he is of the age he's at. And this way, you're not playing the first 6. And you can bring him off the bench. And after you bring him off the bench, he can run those bench units. But Ginobili, Dragic, and Wade have come off the bench when they were not nearly as diminished as Kyle Lowry is at this stage. There really shouldn't be an argument. All right, before we move on to the Jaime Jaquez interview, which we had a few minutes, any either of you guys have closing thoughts on this? Because this ain't gonna go away.
I just thought it was interesting that Spo today, at training camp, when he was asked about it, immediately said, I respect. Pretty much, he respects Kyle Lowry's competitive spirit and all that, which reminded me of last year, Tyler Hero at Media Day, when there was kind of that sentiment when Tyler said he's working towards that starting spot, which ended up happening. And Spo kind of was like, yeah, I applaud that. I want guys to, play at the highest competitive levels, all that. The other thing he said was, we're going to figure all that out. He's a major component to what we want to do. I thought that was interesting, right? Not that it's it means anything more, but just like it lends to the idea that he values Kyle as a bench unit point guard, and that there is value towards that. And then the other kind of just snarky thought that went through my head when he said that is like, yeah, he would be a huge part of a trade.
Well, that's the thing. He values him as a bench player, as a coach. The organization at this point values him as a contract, and
I'm sure
that's
they'll
just the
figure
way
it
it
out.
is. And the question will be how they use that contract, and that's a whole nother pod, which we will get into. But it is: do you use that contract to go get better, even if it means taking on somebody else's years and giving up a first-round pick, or do you use it just to save money? And I think that's the other thing. It puts more pressure on the organization if this gets ugly, or uglier. It puts more pressure on the organization to do something. And sometimes they've been able to wiggle out of it, like they did with Dion and dumping Dion and James Johnson's contracts, and the Winslow situation, which had gotten kind of toxic. And they ended up getting two pieces that helped them get to the finals, right, in Crowder and Iguodala. Can you make another trade like that, which is the kind of trade we've talked about? Or are you just simply waiting for this thing to expire so you can get under certain aprons and luxury tax thresholds and all the rest of that? And then it becomes, okay, you're going to do that? You're still going to re-sign Caleb Martin then? And then we have all kinds of uncomfortable conversations. But it was uncomfortable there today. And so we thought we should address it. Before we get to the Jaquez interview, the only thing I want to mention beyond that is Eric Spoelstra said that a captain would be named, but no captain to this point. So I pulled Bam aside afterwards. To me, he's the only choice. We could talk about Kevin Love, but he's a part-time player at this stage. They want Bam to grow into it. I asked him, do you think you'll be the captain? He said, that's up to Spo. He smiled. He did say there are only a couple guys you could kind of think about, which is true. I don't think it's the kind of role Jimmy would want anyway. He didn't say that. I'm saying that. And I said, are you up to it after everything that you did? Do you want the responsibility? And Bam said, yes. He nodded. So
Ethan, one more
make
thing
that
before we
official.
close.
You're the one who's always trying to cut off these podcasts. Go ahead.
No, I'm trying for it to not be 40 minutes, but since we're at 20, it's okay. The one thing I wanted to add is going back to Kyle really quick, and I thought you would find this interesting. I forgot to say it earlier, was that the only experience I've had that was reminiscent of what happened today with Kyle, because I know you mentioned Dion, and I remember that one being kind of like it, but the one that came to my mind earlier was Kyrie, your boy, who basically that one time I covered him on the road where he was just going back and forth with the media, and it was just like intense, uncomfortable, combative, and it was just to a higher degree. Obviously, I don't think it was to that level, because Kyrie will just go back and forth with a guy, where Kyle is just like trying to say something and leave. Kyrie will drag it out, but that was, I got some of those vibes, and I know how highly you regard Kyrie Irving.
Well, yeah, but it's different, because here's the part I don't understand about it. I don't know why Kyle has had an issue with the Miami media pretty much since he got here. It's weird to me. I don't judge guys based on that. No, he was known to be combative at times, but had developed great relationships with the Toronto media. And he never, part of it was, I guess, the time. It was sort of a tail end of COVID, all the rest of that stuff. But like, I don't know. He just has not wanted really any part of any of the other stuff here. And I keep saying it reminds me a little bit of what I heard about Dwayne when he went to Chicago. It just wasn't his, even though he had ties to Chicago. Kyle didn't have ties down here. But Chicago writers would be like, is Dwayne, I mean, Dwayne seems kind of edgy. Doesn't want to, I'm like, that's weird. I said, that's not the Dwayne Wade that I encountered, for the first 13 seasons or 12, 13 seasons of his career. It just from the very beginning has just seemed like, I don't know. He got the contract, is willing to kind of fit into the team to a certain degree, but the rest of this stuff, he hasn't tried to make any friends down here. He just hasn't. And not every guy does, but this was a guy who did that in a previous stop. And I don't know, it almost has felt since the beginning like they gave him the contract. Jimmy wanted him to be here, but there wasn't really a whole lot of thought that went beyond that. And you're right. I think a parting is inevitable unless the cost is too high. All right. We do want to get to a Jaime Jaquez interview here. We got more interviews coming up during the course of the week. Caleb Martin, we had a great sit down with him. Thomas Bryant, Haywood Highsmith, RJ Hampton. We're going to try to catch up with Duncan Robinson, Jamal Cain this week as well at camp. So plenty of interviews, plenty of commentary. Stay tuned to 5 on the Floor. And right after this, time for Jaime Jaquez.